Welcome back to the Emily Show. This week, we need to talk about Karen Reed's attorneys filing their opening brief for their appeal to the Supreme Judicial Court in Massachusetts, and baby reindeer updates, and how the college admissions scandal might be giving Netflix a bit of a problem. But you know what shouldn't be a problem? Fast, easy meals delivered right to your door, and Green Chef has you covered. They have delicious fruits and veggie that are ripe and in season, and fall is the perfect time to dig into Green Chef. So get meals that feel good and taste even better delivered right to you. Go to greenchef.com/EmilyBaker50 for 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next 2 months. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome to The Emily Show. I'm Emily D. Baker, the internet's go-to legal analyst and big fan of the cursey words. I've been a licensed attorney for over 17 years. I'm a former prosecutor, and I break down the legal side of pop culture and entertainment stories we can't stop talking about. We should just get into it. Let's go. So before we even get into today's episode, it's Emily from the future, because the judge dropped a ruling in the baby reindeer case late on Friday after this episode had been recorded. I am adding an addendum to the end of the episode with a brief summary of that ruling. I did not change the entire episode because I think the discussion of where media companies stand with telling stories that are based on people's experiences is a very important discussion. So we're going to continue to have it. But you want to stay all the way tuned to the end so you know what happens. And I wanted to let those of you who saw the news about the ruling know that, yes, it will be addressed at the end of this episode. So let's get all the way into it now. First, in Massachusetts, Karen Reed's defense attorneys have filed the opening brief to their appeal after the Supreme Judicial Court, or SJC in Massachusetts, agreed to take the case, and they're going to be looking at the case with a full court. I think it's because this case presents some potentially difficult, challenging, and novel legal issues. This is not an argument we see often that, hey, Your Honor, the jury reached a verdict here, but there were no verdict slips and no verdict was taken in court. But because a verdict was reached, you cannot retry this defendant on several of the counts because of that verdict. Normally, we see a verdict rendered in open court, but where the judge did not ask the jury if there were any other additional questions and declared the mistrial shortly after they came in, and where jurors reached out in confusion, this is a very unique situation. And it's going to give the court some pause on what do you do if the jury says after the fact, no, wait, we had a verdict. We just didn't have a verdict on every single count, because jurors can come back with split verdicts, meaning a verdict on a few counts and no verdict or a different verdict on other counts. It can happen, but the way the jury instructions are written, I don't know if the jurors knew that they could do that. But Judge Cannoni, when denying this motion to dismiss in her court after oral argument, said that there has to be an open and public verdict affirmed in open court. And that's really at the heart of what the defense is arguing here, that the right against double jeopardy, you can't be twice put in jeopardy for the same cause. That right precludes going forward on counts 1 and 3 in this case, which is the second-degree homicide and the hit and run causing death. Those two counts are what the jury said they rendered verdicts on, and the heart of that defense argument is really procedure or formality of signing a certain form, doing it a certain way, shouldn't be the court's only consideration if you have 12 jurors unanimously saying they have a verdict. But here we don't yet have 12 jurors saying they unanimously have a verdict because the jury has not been polled. And the defense is still looking for that. At the end of the day, if the court's not inclined to dismiss at this stage, at least let us voir dire the jury after verdict. And we have seen this happen in numerous high-profile cases where the jury is questioned or voir dired after a case is over. And in this case, part of the argument against doing that from the Commonwealth was you can't ask about the process of deliberation, the thought process, what was said and how they did it. And the defense is arguing, but asking what the result is not getting into the deliberative process. It is saying, was there a unanimous verdict? That doesn't ask, how did you reach the verdict? What did you consider? What evidence was persuasive? Notably to me, Not a single juror has come forward to disagree with what has been very widely publicized, that the jury reached unanimous verdicts. And I covered one of the jurors asking that the jury list not be made public after the 11-day sealing period. And in that statement to the court, after it had been publicized, the jurors were coming forward saying there was a unanimous verdict. In that juror's affidavit, nowhere does it say that a unanimous verdict was not reached. That affidavit was silent as to the verdict issue. But it's notable to me that with so much publicity about this issue, no one has stood up and said that's not the case. And so I wonder if the jury was brought in one by one and asked if they reached a unanimous verdict, if 12 of them would say, yes, we reached a unanimous verdict. The Commonwealth's concern is, okay, but if you ask them that, then you necessarily have to ask them, well, why didn't it go on the verdict slip? I don't know if you have to go that far. If 12 jurors say we reached a verdict, then you have a verdict. I don't know if you have to get into why they didn't formalize the verdict, but that's the tension here, is asking that next maybe logical question could start to invade the province of jury deliberations, which is why this is not an easy legal question. Morally, it feels like a very easy question. Well, this jury served for 10 weeks when you include the time to select a jury, and they worked diligently. And after all of that time, if they reached a verdict, their will should be heard by the court. But opening back into jury deliberations after a case is mistried can be a can of worms. And the court is very conscientious of never opening that can of worms. And the law is incredibly clear on not invading the province of the jury, not asking about deliberations. But I think there is room to argue that you don't necessarily have to do that here. So there is tension built in to the decision of this case, and the defense is arguing back to the court, but the Commonwealth and the Judge Cannoni at the lower court, never substantiated their arguments with any case law showing that jurors had come to a verdict, but then they hadn't formalized it properly, and then it wasn't honored by the court. And it's because it's such a unique case here, but the burden is on the defense to convince the court to dismiss this case. The defense also argue in their motion that the lack of formality does not supersede the defendant's fundamental constitutional rights, and that the Supreme Court has found that formality shouldn't stand essentially alone, that more has to be considered here, and that the heart of what should be considered is the will of the jury and the unanimous final verdict, not whether it was written down or not. I'm interested to see what the Supreme Judicial Court does here. If they deny the motion to dismiss, I can see Karen Reed's attorneys taking this up to the First Circuit Court of Appeals and saying this cannot be the accurate constitutional interpretation of what a final verdict is, and continuing to fight this up the chain of appeals. But will that delay the January 2025 trial date? Possibly. So in sum, the defense's arguments are consistent with what they have been in this opening brief. Their statement of issues presented says, 1, whether the jury's final unanimous agreement following the trial that Ms. Reed is not guilty of counts 1 and 3 constitutes an acquittal for double jeopardy purposes that precludes retrial on those counts. 2, whether Ms. Reed was alternatively entitled to a post-trial inquiry to substantiate her claim that the jury acquitted her on counts 1 and 3. And that would be the post-trial voir dire of bringing the 12 jurors in and being like, did you reach a verdict on counts 1 and 3? And 3, whether there is manifest necessity to support the declaration of a mistrial on counts 1 and 3, and where 1, the jury was not deadlocked and in fact had reached a unanimous agreement on those counts. 2, the trial court provided no opportunity for Ms. Reed or her counsel to be heard regarding the declaration of a mistrial. 3, the record reflects no consideration of alternatives to a mistrial when in fact such alternatives existed and were codified in Massachusetts Rule of Criminal Procedure 27B. We saw these arguments play out in Judge Cannoni's ruling and in the oral arguments in court. I think we will see oral arguments to the Supreme Judicial Court on this again, and they will mostly line in with the arguments that have already existed. What I would be curious to see if we do get oral arguments is what questions the court asks of the attorney, because that's less of a presentation process and can be much more of a questioning back and forth where the court is inquiring deeper of the lawyers to understand their position and try to come up with an answer, because this does present some novel questions, including should there be a voir dire here, where that voir dire would fall into a gray zone. In a case like Murdaugh, where there was accusations of an external party who is also a government employee interceding into the jury, that is a very clear-cut circumstance where you get to question the jurors. And of course, that decision is also up on appeal. But that's a clear situation where if there is outside influence, you can question the jurors about it. This is a much more nuanced and much more gray-zoned area, as we've discussed. When they come to the argument, the trial court provided no opportunity for Reed to be heard, that echoes their argument to Judge Cannoni as well, that the court just read the final question and declared a mistrial and there was no further conversation. Of course, Judge Cannoni fired back in her ruling that the defense asked for the Rodriguez 2A instruction multiple times. They knew that after that instruction was read, if the jury still could not come to an agreement, then a mistrial would be declared. And that, I think what she said in her ruling in sum was, the defense has not been shy or silent in this case. If they needed to be heard, they made it clear. And then she also cited to their post-mistrial courthouse steps interview, and they never raised these issues after walking out of court. They didn't walk out of court and say, I can't believe the judge didn't even let us speak to the jurors. They walked out of court and said, we will continue to fight this case. We ain't got no quit. That was quoting Alan Jackson. And as this goes forward, we will see the prosecution's response due by October 16th, then the reply from Reed's attorneys due by October 25th, which means if there's going to be any oral argument, it will be scheduled after that, which would be mid-late November at the absolute earliest. So we're looking at not getting a ruling on this till December, possibly. And her retrial is currently set for January 2025. So will we see at some point the defense asking to push that trial date out later because of the pending appeal? It's very possible. And speaking about something that also has a trial date, surprisingly, I would like to update you on all things Baby Reindeer. Now, some of you may have watched Baby Reindeer on Netflix and know what I'm talking about, but may have seen that they won 4 awards at the Emmys a few weeks back. It is not a light show, but it is based on the lead actor Richard Gadd's life experiences. The defamation suit against Netflix is based on that. In the show, Gadd describes not only his own personal struggles, but ongoing incidents with a woman who has come forward and identified herself. In the show, she's called Martha, but in all of the litigation on this and the headlines, the interwebs have deemed her the real Martha. Her name is Fiona Harvey. She has come forward and said, this was based on me and this is defamatory because you can tell that it's me and I didn't do the things that the show says that I did. And I broke down that initial complaint a number of episodes ago. If you want to see all of the allegations regarding defamation and the lawsuit, put in clips from the Netflix show and really focused on the beginning of the Netflix show that says in like typewriter type across the front, this is a real story. Though Netflix also disclaims that individuals and events have been changed. The question the law is starting to get into is what change is enough for it not to be defamatory? And Netflix is trying to straddle the line on their defense in the Baby Reindeer suit, saying it's not defamatory, it is true, and we didn't identify a single individual. This is a story based on true events, inspired by true events, but not direct enough to be defamatory. But even if you can identify who this is about, the things said are true. So it's a difficult argument. Like, we're not talking about one person specifically, but if we are, the things we said are true. And in the Baby Reindeer litigation, Netflix has filed not only a anti-SLAPP motion, because this case is happening in federal court in California, they can use the California anti-SLAPP statute there, which is strategic litigation against public participation. In California, that is broadly used in defamation cases, saying, look, you have the public right to say things that are true under the First Amendment, and litigation that seeks to silence that protected speech should be dispatched with before you even get into discovery. And then if you are the person that is sued, the defendant, and you're victorious in that motion, you also get your lawyer's fees. It's a pretty stern sanction if a case is brought simply seeking to silence someone. If the case has merit, of course, it will surpass the anti-SLAPP motion. If it's found that the case would not survive ultimately, and it is just silencing protected speech, then that SLAPP motion can be granted. It dismisses the entire case with prejudice and it's done. So it's a very early termination to litigation. So Netflix has filed an anti-SLAPP suit, and they've also filed a motion to dismiss. A motion to dismiss is not nearly as impactful if it's granted because there's opportunity to modify the complaint. The standard at motion to dismiss is fairly low. Is anything you complained of, if taken as all entirely true, enough to allege in the four corners of this lawsuit a claim or a cause of action that can stand? That's a fairly low standard on a motion to dismiss, but after you best that hurdle, then the case goes on to discovery, which can be time-consuming, onerous, and expensive. Then you get into all the depositions and litigation gets underway. Winning an anti-SLAPP motion is substantially more impactful than winning a motion to dismiss because it's just have another go at it, essentially. And Netflix is battling similar litigation in a lot of different lawsuits. I talked about this a bit last time when I covered this initial lawsuit, but we've seen individuals like Buster Murdaugh sue over multiple docuseries made over the Murdaugh cases. And we also saw Netflix getting sued in regard to their documentary, Operation Varsity Blues, the college admission scandal. Some of you may remember the college admission scandal, which was a wide-ranging, essentially, fraud where the quote-unquote mastermind, Rick Singer, was having wayward parents pay him to help get their kids into college through quote-unquote loopholes. I mean, really, it's fraud, but quote-unquote loopholes of pretend to be on the crew team, and then maybe you'll get admitted under a different evaluation process because you're an athlete that's bringing value to the university, et cetera, et cetera. One of the individuals who was featured in that documentary, which I have not watched, was actually cleared of their charges for the most part. So John Wilson had almost all of his convictions overturned on appeal. And the Varsity Blues prosecutions are facing a substantial amount of challenges. This is not the only case that has had prosecutorial issues, though a lot of parents swept up in this, pled guilty, served a minimal amount of time, and have moved on. But John Wilson is one of the individuals that chose to fight this. He was accused of attempting to get his kid into USC, but everything was dismissed by the Court of Appeals except for one single tax charge. Funny enough, the prosecution of Wilson over his son's admission to USC, University of Southern California, not the South Carolina USC, different USC, Trojans, not Gamecocks. That was prosecuted in Massachusetts, and it was the First Circuit Court of Appeals that threw out all of the convictions but the tax issue, because the government's always going to get you on taxes. If they look, they're going to get you on taxes. Subsequently, Wilson sued Netflix for defamation over their telling of Operation Varsity Blues. Netflix went forward and challenged this on motion to dismiss and lost. So now this case is pushing forward into discovery. But the Netflix documentary, as argued by Wilson, blurred the lines between a true story and a sensationalized story. So it's not just a ripped from the headlines and you can't tell who's who. It's closer in line to being a sensationalized documentary, which does blur the line of, is what's being said true? Is it fictionalized? Is it defamation? And that's maybe where the Baby Reindeer suit is trying to fall. Of course, in the Baby Reindeer suit, there is quite a lot of documentation that Netflix and Gadd, the writer of the one-man show that then became Baby Reindeer, has over the behavior of Fiona Harvey, who is depicted, or who says she is depicted, in Baby Reindeer. And so will the documentation of what is depicted and the behaviors that are documented, how much will that play here? And I think the anti-SLAPP litigation then becomes really much more interesting to Netflix than the motion to dismiss, which may not be granted, like in the Varsity Blues case. The attorney for Wilson who brought the civil lawsuit told Law 360 that prior to Netflix releasing the film, their office sent a detailed letter attaching voluminous public records from the criminal case and putting them on notice that John Wilson was very differently situated from other parents featured in the film, all of whom had pled guilty to egregious fraud. He goes on to say, I know from experience that anytime a public figure plaintiff is filing a defamation suit against a media defendant, they're in for an uphill battle, even just surviving a motion to dismiss. Courts tend to scrutinize such complaints very closely. And that is the situation that Fiona Harvey finds herself in, going up against Netflix with the voluminous documentation that Netflix and Gadd have. And this starts to really highlight the difficulty of public figure defamation suits, which is the point of the increased standard for public figure defamation, because there's a balance between critique, criticism, and commentary and defamation. And that higher standard is meant to allow for commentary about public figures. The thing that has changed since these laws were written is that who is a public figure has greatly expanded in our expanded and more connected media and social media landscape. What I find really interesting is one of the attorneys giving commentary on all of this is Wayne Dennison, who was one of the attorneys on Johnny Depp's team, who is the co-chair of Brown Rudnick's brand and reputation management team. And he said that the information shared with Netflix ahead of time can work against Netflix as the case plays out. Quote, Netflix had actual knowledge that this kid was a fairly accomplished student and a really accomplished athlete. The fair reporting privilege is a safe harbor, but the story has got to be substantially correct. If it's edited to misrepresent facts, then the privilege doesn't apply. So it's interesting to see all of the lawyers trying to parse through the nuance of different cases against Netflix, like the Baby Reindeer case vis-a-vis the college admission scandal case. And then eventually we will see this playing out in litigation in the Buster Murdaugh lawsuits as well. So let's talk about what's at the heart of the Netflix motions, and that is statements and supporting affidavits made by Richard Gadd. So let's talk about where we are procedurally with the Baby Reindeer case, and then we will dive in to the supporting documentation to Netflix's arguments after we had already gone through the initial complaint. It'll be linked all of the places. We are at the end of briefing for both the motion to dismiss and the anti-SLAPP motion that I described a little bit earlier in this episode. So there are two motions going on simultaneously. Netflix is saying, hey, court, one of these two things, can we go ahead and get rid of this case and fight through the litigation? And the real Martha or Fiona Harvey's attorneys have had some back and forth with the court with filing things, and the court's like, you can't do that way, you can't do this way. But it seems that everything is on track, and the court has taken this under submission on briefing. The court's not hearing oral argument on any of these motions. Said the briefing is done. I'm taking these under submission and will issue an order on both motions. So we are waiting for an order from the U.S. District Court for the Central District of California, so the federal court there in California. Netflix continues to argue that the identity of Martha was never disclosed, that things were altered and changed so that she could not be found. The real life Martha, Fiona Harvey, has said, no, the internet found me and the show did not alter facts enough that I couldn't be found. It was clearly about me. Netflix has pointed out that when Fiona Harvey did an interview with Piers Morgan, she said, it could never be me. This could never be me. That's not me. I didn't do these things. So that's not me, which Netflix has highlighted again and again. And then Netflix has also highlighted that, no, the things we show in the show, she actually did do. She sent these emails. She was accused of stalking a member of parliament's wife, and they showed all of the receipts, hundreds and hundreds of pages of attachments, because in that anti-SLAPP motion, it's the earliest litigation of the case where they're showing the court, look, this is why we will ultimately prevail. This is a matter of public interest. This is a proper case of speech for the anti-SLAPP motion to apply to. And ultimately, the plaintiff will not be able to show that she will prevail because this is the evidence we have showing not only did we not disclose who this individual was, but even if the court finds that you can discern who Martha is in the show, also, she did the things we're saying she did in the show. Richard Gadd is allowed to share his own experience without being sued for defamation. And this is what anti-SLAPP was really considered for, so that someone sharing their experience, their story, can't be sued and silenced by someone else saying, no, you can't sue me for defamation, and then waiting them out in hundreds of thousands of dollars of litigation and forcing them into silence by outspending them in litigation. We see it in a little different way here because Netflix is the defendant, but also the party who arguably has substantially more resources at their disposal. So Netflix is trying to get it dismissed one way or the other. Real Life Martha is saying absolutely no way. And the fact that they put in the show the euphemism, my curtains need hung badly, allowed people to go onto Twitter and find that someone named Fiona Harvey had made that tweet directed at Richard Gadd, the creator and then lead actor of Baby Reindeer. And that in and of itself is enough that they did not go far enough to protect Fiona Harvey because they made Martha so similar to her, just changing a name's not enough. Well, Richard Gadd is submitting a declaration in support of Netflix. He's not a defendant here. Netflix is. But in support of Netflix's motion, saying, no, this is my experience. And if the court finds that this was not fictionalized enough, then the things we said are true and the case needs to be dismissed anyway. Thank you to Lume for sponsoring today's episode. If you haven't tried Lume yet, I don't know what you're waiting for. Lume is a whole body deodorant that has you covered from your pits to your parts to your feet and everything in between. It was created by an OBGYN, so it is safe to use wherever you want to make sure that there is no odor there. And if you've wanted to try Lume's full range of products, everything from their body wash that also works to reduce odor to the amazing deodorant wipes that you can throw in your kid's backpack for band practice. Wow, Emily, that's an oddly specific example. Yes, it is my life. To their deodorant stick or their deodorant in the tube. You can try it all with their starter pack. And you can choose everything from lavender sage to unscented to clean tangerine or soft powder. So you know there's going to be a scent that works not just for you, but for everyone in your household. And as an offer to our listeners, new customers get 15% off all Lume products. And if you're interested in their starter pack to try a variety of products, you get the discount from the starter pack and the 15% off, which is over 40% off the starter pack. So use code LAWNERD for 15% off your purchase at lumedeodorant.com. That's LumeDeodorant.com. Let's get back to today's episode. So we are looking at the declaration of Richard Gadd. Now, Fiona Harvey also tried to have this stricken from the record, and the court was like, no, that's not happening. This is part of the record. It's being considered. This motion with exhibits is over 193 pages. No, we're not going through all of them, but we are going to go through the declaration because I was very interested in it, and I think you might be too. The declaration from Gadd is, I am a comedian, writer, and actor. I created, wrote, and starred in the Netflix series Baby Reindeer. I have personal knowledge of the facts set forth below and if called as a witness could testify competently thereto. I submit this declaration in support of Netflix's special motion to strike, the anti-SLAPP motion. I have written and starred in several original theater shows, including Cheese and Crack Whores, Breaking Gadd, and Waiting for Godot, which all have debuted at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival from 2013 to 2015 and went on to have successful runs at London's Soho Theatre. The Edinburgh Fringe Festival is one of the largest performing arts festivals in the world. It occurs annually in Edinburgh, Scotland, and showcases artists of every genre of live performance. In 2016, I wrote and starred in Monkey See, Monkey Do, which won the Edinburgh Comedy Award for Best Comedy Show. It went on to have several sellout runs at the Soho Theatre, toured the United Kingdom, and was broadcast on Comedy Central in 2017. He goes on to talk about monkey see, monkey do, and what that was like, and how it was written, and that it was a fictionalized account of real life experiences. He said he wrote and starred in a theater production of Baby Reindeer, which premiered at the 2019 Edinburgh Fringe Festival and won the Scotsman Fringe Festival Award for New Writing and a Stage Award for Acting Excellence. Like the series, the show centered on an encounter with a stalker named Martha and addressed stalking, sexual assault, obsession, self-delusion, self-destruction, and self-discovery. I used real trauma as the basis for Monkey See, Monkey Do and Baby Reindeer while creating characters, scenes, dialogue, and dramatic devices to support the fictionalized story. In other words, although these stage productions were emotionally true and based on real events in my life, they dramatized people, places, things, and events to tell a story. The series, which was released on Netflix April 11th, 2024, is based on aspects of the Baby Reindeer stage production. The series reprises characters, scenes, and dialogue from the theater version and is a continuation of my exploration of abuse, manipulation, exploitation, identity, sexual identity, self-loathing, self-destruction, and self-discovery. My personal struggles with sexual identity and experiences with abuse, harassment, and stalking inspired me to write and star in the theater version of Baby Reindeer and subsequently the series. The series is a dramatic work. It is not a documentary or attempt at realism. While the series is based on my real life and real life events and is at its core emotionally true, it is not a beat by beat recounting of events and emotions I experienced as they transpired. It is fictionalized and not intended to portray actual facts, which is where we also see the plaintiff coming in at the beginning of their complaint saying, the beginning of this series says this is a true story, not this is based on a true story, which may cause some pause for the court. I mean, if law does anything, it's splitting hairs and parsing words. He goes on to say, well, my series is emotionally true. It is not intended to depict any real persons. Instead, I created fictionalized characters, including Martha and Donnie. Again, the thing that's going to be hard with this is he lines out all the emails and some of them are recreated almost exactly. So even though he's saying this is all fictionalized, it's some fictionalized, some real. And where is the blending of real and fictionalized going to become a problem? Is this a case closer to it being more fiction? Or is this a case more akin to the college admissions scandal? However, in the college admissions scandal, there was a lot of forewarning that these situations and circumstances between defendants depicted, parents depicted, were different, where here the default is this is true. But I think there's a tension in the argument for Netflix saying this is all fictionalized, but also it's true and we stand by what we said. That is a difficult both sides argument to make. They go on to then talk about the goal behind the characters as storytelling devices. And then he gets into his real life experiences with Fiona Harvey. In 2014, I met Harvey at the pub where I worked at the time, the Howley Arms. I noticed that Harvey looked distressed and offered her a cup of tea on the house. For any of you who've watched Baby Reindeer, that's exactly what happens. It's interesting because in all these motions, they filed an affidavit from the supervisor at the bar talking about how difficult and scary this period of time was working at the bar. Again, kind of lining up with the show. It goes on to say, on noticing each other's accents, we engaged in what I took at the time to be a friendly conversation and discussed our common Scottish heritage. Following that first meeting, Harvey subsequently stalked and harassed me throughout 2014 to 2017. She frequently appeared at the pub. It quickly became clear that she had memorized my shift pattern by hanging around the pub constantly. She would then arrive just before my shift started on most days I was working and sit at the end of the bar, which is depicted in the show. She would also call the pub constantly on days I was not working to check if I was in. This went on for a very long period of time. Sometimes she would stay my entire shift. Other times she would stay a few hours. Sometimes she would just sit and say something and abruptly leave. Harvey's behavior quickly grew concerning for me. What started out as someone sitting at the end of the bar and chatting most days turned into her directly impacting my ability to work, injecting as I tried to serve tables, and talking to most customers I served at the bar. She would often try to engage with me by repeatedly trying to make jokes or banter. She would tell customers of the pub that I was a comedian and sometimes adopted smutty innuendos to try to embarrass me in front of staff. At first, I engaged with Harvey and her jokes, viewing her as harmless, but it soon became exhausting and I quickly grew frustrated at her continual and unrelenting presence in my work life. Again, lines up fairly closely with the show. It goes on to say, when Harvey was around, I had my guard up. There was a particularly intense period of time when Harvey often attempted to touch me inappropriately and sometimes sexually. Harvey pinched and touched various parts of my body, including my bum, and was generally very quote unquote handsy towards me. The attention was unwelcome, and I found myself constantly trying to dodge Harvey's advances and unwanted physical contact while serving tables. I did ask Harvey to leave me alone and to refrain from making advances towards me on several occasions. However, she ignored my request, and as with her wider behavior, she was persistent and relentless. Around March 2015, she became increasingly hostile towards me and others at the bar. Matters escalated when I confronted her in the pub for falsely telling one of the regulars that we had sex, which she took badly. On one occasion, Harvey mentioned to a customer at the bar a bad review about me, which she had seen online. I retorted by referring to news coverage I had seen regarding Harvey's harassment of a former member of parliament, Jimmy Rye, and his wife, Laura. She briefly left the pub. Again, this plays out in the show pretty close to what's being said here. It says she briefly left the pub. When she re-entered, I was sitting on a wood chair in the corner to the right of the bar, crouched down by the condiments cupboard, marrying up the ketchups. Harvey came behind the bar to where I was standing and shoved me in the back of my neck. I turned to find her chastising me while pointing in my face. I remember that she referred to the comedian Frankie Boyle's mouth having got him into trouble, and she said that my mouth would get me into trouble too. She was furious, and I found her demeanor intimidating. I remember quickly apologizing out of fear she was going to hit me, as well as embarrassment at the fact that a number of customers nearby were looking over. She subsequently stormed out of the pub and repeated that my mouth was going to get me in trouble as she left. The interaction was threatening, but I was also embarrassed and angry that she had affronted me in such a physical and public manner. As matters escalated, Harvey's visits to the pub became increasingly intense. At times, I would hide in the basement or on the balcony in hope that she might grow bored and leave. I was scared of Harvey and what she might be capable of, particularly having seen articles about her behavior towards the Rise online. A lot of the staff were intimidated by her too and tried to adopt different measures to get her to leave me alone so as not to escalate things further. For example, staff would tell her that I was not working, so she would leave or pretend that I had left. Nothing deterred her. And I remember long shifts where I would sit out on the balcony or in the basement for hours waiting for her to leave. I imagine that had some substantial financial impact if tipping is part of pay the way it is so much in the US. It might not be as much of a factor, but having to sit out a work shift because someone is stalking you in your workplace is horrific. It goes on to say that Harvey sometimes waited outside the pub for me to finish work. She followed me around town, sometimes very close to where I live, and she attended many of my comedy and theater performances. Often when I posted about my performance online, usually on Twitter, she would turn up and occasionally be disruptive. On one occasion, I was appearing in a show at Aces and Eights in London in July 2016, where before the show started, the producer spotted her in the audience. The producer subsequently went around the audience and told everyone other than Harvey that we would be pretending the show had been canceled so they could return 10 minutes later just to get Harvey to leave. I was then catching some fresh air when, on leaving the venue, Harvey confronted me about canceling the show. Another member of the producing team had to stand between me and Harvey, who was becoming increasingly animated towards me. In addition, I have always had to put extensive measures in place to stop Harvey from attending my shows, including at venues like Soho Theater and Bush Theater, as well as involving producing partners Burke's Nest and Francesca Moody Productions to help manage the situation. It goes on to say around July 2014, Harvey obtained my email address from my personal website, which at the time included my contact details to facilitate inquiries and bookings for comedy performances. Harvey emailed me relentlessly throughout all hours of the day and night. She would sometimes send emails at 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., and at times she would send multiple emails in a single day. I never engaged with, responded to, or referred to her emails because I feared it would only make matters worse if she knew for certain I was receiving them. He goes on to say she sent me thousands of emails, hundreds of voicemails, and a number of handwritten letters. These communications often include sexually explicit, violent, or derogatory content, hateful speech, and threats. The emails and voicemails attached to this declaration represent just a fraction of those I received from Harvey. Most of the emails referenced in this declaration were provided to the police. Below, I provide some examples of the types of emails I received. Harvey regularly monitored my social media and sent me emails discussing photos posted to my Twitter. On January 29th, 2015, Harvey sent me an email with the subject line, quote, "Yummy mummy," which started with, "I see your mom is on Twitter." Sorry, "I see your mum is on Twitter." I said that in American. Apologies. Quote, "I see your mum is on Twitter. I looked up yours to see what was going on in your head, and you retweeted her." And then it's attached as an exhibit. On September 17th, 2016, Harvey emailed me, "I love the photo of you sleeping on Twitter." And that is also attached. Most of these are attached, and I'm going to go through some more of them, but some of them are fairly hateful. Well, it goes on to say Harvey's emails frequently contain hateful speech, derogatory, racist, and homophobic language, and then gives an example of all of that. It says Harvey frequently made personal attacks and threatened me in her emails. On January 25th, 2015, Harvey sent me a lengthy email acknowledging that she had been banned from the bar, that she had been banned from the pub. Again, I'm sorry, I said it in American. She had been banned from the pub where he was employed, calling him naive, ugly, stupid, and badly educated, insulting and threatening several of my colleagues at the pub, and threatening me with litigation. It goes on to say that Harvey reminded him that she had, quote, "considerable contacts in every walk of life, all very angry with you, including a number of law firms." Well, this email stated that Harvey was, quote, "blocking my email account," and finished speaking with me. She continued to send hundreds of emails after this. On January 25th, 2016, Harvey mailed me a multi-page handwritten letter, which was barely legible. The letter claimed that Harvey did not read emails because she was allergic to emails, called me a prick, and demanded I call her because she is fed up with the fannying about. Harvey threatened me that I had a, quote, "very big enemy in the acting world. I'm not telling you who that is, but they are saying you are all image, and a pain in the butt. Frankly, I'm not surprised. Narcissists are like that." And this goes on and on and on with the insults, threats, and the letting him know that she is keeping an eye on him across social media and performances. It goes on to say that the emails also regularly proposition him with lewd and explicit language. And then they include some of the explicit emails saying things including, quote, "sex 3 times at night and twice in the morning. I just want to give you loads and loads of BJs to make you sleep," and on and on and on. A lot of these things are detailed fairly graphically in the show. So even this attachment in the defense motion doubles down on what we said is true and showing that what they're saying about Harvey is easily identifiable to Harvey. That doesn't mean it's easily identifiable to anyone else, though. If this gets past the anti-slap stage, will be a consideration as it goes forward in defamation. And it's going to be interesting to see where those boundaries are on someone being able to retell the real things that happened to them, even when they try to fictionalize it to protect the other party. Is that going to be the right tack? Or will lawsuits like this say, you know what? If you try to change names and modify things so the individual is not as readily identifiable, you're going to get sued. So if you're going to get sued either way, maybe the best option for parties is to say, these things are true and this is who did it. And I'm curious to see how the law moves forward in this area of public figure defamation. And then how the law perceives Fiona Harvey and if she is a public figure or not, because we have to look at what happened before the Netflix series. But did her inserting herself into this and going on to Piers Morgan make her a public figure in connection with this? Did she create that problem for herself by coming forward and saying, hey, this is me. Also, the show doesn't depict me. Also, I never did those things, but also this is me, but also it's not true. It then gets to telling the court that once Harvey obtained Gadd's phone number, she began calling and leaving hundreds of voicemails, that he did not record all of the voicemails, but have hours of voicemails from her recorded and still is in possession of, that the voicemails include graphic details about sexual exploits, stories, STDs, threats against Gadd, his family, his coworkers, and about other victims of Harvey's stalking and harassment. It said over a few days in September 2016, Harvey left hours of voicemails. As soon as my voicemail box cut her off, she would immediately call back and leave another voicemail. During this string of voicemail, Harvey profusely insulted me, calling me a bipolar alcoholic and claiming the whole of Glasgow hates me and has an axe to grind. She made threats against my family and threatened to sue him and shut down the pub, stating that she had the power to do so. She stated that she had access to police files, that she claimed undercover police officers, drug dealers, lawyers, ex-lawyers were all after me, and that the comedy industry hated my guts. And then she started with threats of physical violence, graphic physical violence. On September 17th, 2016, he said he emailed the police, informing them that Harvey again left hours of voicemail and prepared a document outlining the threatening and aggressive messages from the voicemails for the police. He says he coordinated with the police to hand off an SD card with the voicemail recording September 19th, and that is also attached. On September 19th, 2016, Harvey left me another string of voicemails, during which she claimed to have information on my family and warned me not to speak to the police, claiming she was so angry at me, shutting my mouth off. In this voicemail, Harvey claimed to know 100,000 lawyers and threatened me, quote, "You're not as bright as you think you are. I'm not 2 steps ahead. I'm 25,000 steps ahead of you." She said that she would create World War III over a sketch referencing my comedy shows. Gadd also outlines his consistent reach out to police regarding Harvey, and the police told him that they were aware of Harvey because of a prior incident in London with the MP, and that was also depicted in the show. Thank you to today's sponsor, Shopify. Shopify supports The Emily Show and all of my content, and they support the Law Nerd shop, which I made on Shopify. When y'all were like, let's have some Law Nerd merch, Shopify makes it incredibly easy to get a shop up and running no matter what you want to sell and no matter how you want to sell, whether you're selling in person, online, or a combination of the two. And it's no wonder, because Shopify has the #1 checkout on the planet, and they let you use Shop Pay, which I have on the Law Nerd shop, and I also use it when I'm shopping around the interwebs. So whether you're just getting started or whether you're looking for a more robust way to run your store, Shopify is ready to help you upgrade your business. And you can do that and get the same checkout that the Law Nerd shop has with a Shopify trial. Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/lawnerd. Remember, that's all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/lawnerd to upgrade your selling experience today. That's shopify.com/lawnerd, and you'll start hearing this sound soon. So let's get back to today's episode. Gadd goes on in his affidavit to line out the persistent and continued stalking, harassment, and threatening voicemails, emails, which is why this is 193 pages. It then gets to Harvey coming forward. And he says, throughout the process of writing Baby Reindeer and the series, I intentionally did not refer to Harvey by name in any way. When viewers began speculating about the real life inspirations for various characters, I urged them to stop. For example, attached as Exhibit 61 is a copy of a screenshot of my Instagram story dated April 23rd, 2024, in which I urge viewers to stop speculating. I never intended the series to identify any real person as Martha Scott, including Harvey. Martha Scott is not Fiona Harvey. Like all characters in the series, Martha is a fictional character with fictional personality traits that are very different from Harvey's. Harvey identified herself to the press as Martha after 3 or 4 other people previously had falsely been identified as Martha by members of the public, which is interesting because the public said, oh, it's got to be this person. Oh, it's got to be that person. Oh, maybe it's this other person. Before Harvey came forward and said, no, that's me. He goes on to say, I was surprised that Harvey appeared on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Though I have only watched certain segments, I understand she claimed she was the inspiration for the Martha character and said she never sent me thousands of emails or left me any voicemails. She harassed and stalked me over several years, and since her interview, other individuals have contacted me through my agents and publicists and said they were also harassed by Harvey, but all were too scared of her to come forward. That is the end of the declaration and the beginning of 193 pages of exhibits, a lot of which are emails, and the emails that are referred to in the declaration written very much in the style that we see them depicted on the show. So Where will defamation find the boundary between people retelling their stories and people retelling modified, fictionalized versions of their stories? Does that ultimately protect someone from a defamation suit? Or is it going to cause the defamation suit? Or was this always going to be the case with Fiona Harvey as Richard Gadd continued to tell his story? Because we see consistent threats of lawsuits in this. And they have declarations from the law firm where she worked and was quickly terminated from, and the Law Society saying that she's not fit for the profession of law. At the heart of all of this is Richard Gadd's personal pain and clearly a lot of distress on the part of Fiona Harvey. But where does the law find that boundary? And I'm interested to see how this case moves forward because it may shift how people think about telling their own stories, but it also may shift the growing sphere of these rapid, quote unquote, docuseries that aren't really news pieces, but include quite a lot of speculation about trending news topics and things like criminal and civil cases, like we see in the Murdaugh case. It's a changing landscape, but does modifying a few details protect you from defamation? Or is it better to just lean in to exactly what the truth is and not cover any of the speculation? It's why I stick to court documents. Look, I'm going to say what we talked about in court. We're going to talk about how the law might impact it and ask questions about where the law should fall, does fall, and might be going in the future. Our laws are dynamic and continue to change to meet modern needs. And I'm wondering if in the age of so much production where somebody can start a YouTube channel, go on Instagram, and really tell their story, where is the protection and what is the better course of action? I would love to hear your thoughts on all of this. I will continue following this case. This is a federal civil case. I don't know if this will go to trial. It is slated to go to trial in May 2025. That can get pushed. If this survives the anti-slap motion by Netflix, then it will go into discovery and then we will see what happens. But I don't know if Netflix is going to back down on this one. Would you if you were Netflix? Leonard, I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think. Hey, Emily from the future, back again with an addendum. After this episode was recorded, the judge did rule in this case, and I wanted to make sure that you had a quick update because I think I said multiple times, we don't know what the judge is going to do. Well, now we do. The judge denied the anti-slap motion in its entirety and granted a lot of the motion to dismiss, which means this case is now pared down to the defamation claim and the intentional infliction of emotional distress claim. The other claims, negligence, gross negligence, and the different rights of publicity have been removed from the case on the motion to dismiss. Could the plaintiff here try to refile those causes of action based on the judge's ruling? Yes, they are not dismissed with prejudice. They could try to reassert those claims differently because it was granted on a motion to dismiss. They could try again. However, there is already a stipulation that the parties have agreed to a specific mediator. So it's likely this case will go into mediation first and we won't see a refiled amended complaint after this motion to dismiss trying to reassert those causes of action. On the anti-slap motion, the court made some interesting rulings, and we can talk about this ruling more down the road, but the court did find that it was easy enough to identify who the, quote, real life Martha was in this case, that saying it is not Fiona Harvey is not a persuasive argument. The court does find that there are specific things in the show that are not truthful, including that the Martha character was a twice convicted criminal that spent 5 years in prison for stalking. The court said the "this is a true story" at the beginning of the show on Netflix could lead a reasonable viewer to believe that these things are all truthful and based in reality, and that because it was easy enough to find who Martha is, because the way Martha is depicted in the show is so closely tied to who Fiona Harvey is, that is part of why this is not dramatized, but the defamation claim stands. And the twice convicted criminal, the court goes on to say that it is a far difference between stalking and being convicted of stalking and spending time in prison. The allegation that she stalked a police officer, the violent attack in the pub, there is discrepancy over whether or not there was a smashed glass bottle, an eye gouging, and what have you. So the court said there is room for this on the anti-SLAPP and the motion to dismiss to go forward for a finder of fact to determine where the difference is, but it is not clear to the court that the defendant Netflix would win on the defamation causes of action for the anti-SLAPP motion. The court also went through a pretty detailed analysis of whether or not Fiona Harvey was a public figure or could be a limited public figure. And the court said that it may be the case, and so also evaluated actual malice for defamation regarding a public figure, and did find that stating based on a true story when you know it is not true can imply a reckless disregard for the truth. The court specifically notes that, quote, according to the Sunday Times, defendants insisted on adding the "this is a true story" line to the series despite Gadd's concerns. The writer had concerns about Netflix including that. The court says this suggests a reckless disregard of whether statements in the series were false and thus actual malice. Thus, the defendant Netflix's argument also fails as the court was going through the ruling on the anti-SLAPP. So the line, "this is a true story," is as impactful to the court as plaintiff Fiona Harvey said it would be. So this is a partial win for Netflix, but I imagine it does not feel that way to them. This feels like a much larger loss. And now that the court has ruled that the defamation cause of action and the intentional infliction of emotional distress will go forward, I am not surprised to see that the parties have immediately agreed on what mediator they will be using moving forward. I imagine down the road this case will settle short of trial. Let me know if you'd like me to go into this ruling more thoroughly, talk about how the court weighed the factors in the anti-SLAPP and where those boundaries are. But Netflix modifying Gadd's story with the "this is a true story" is going to be a big sticking point here for which Netflix may be liable. And now let's say goodbye the way we said goodbye when we first recorded this. Stay in the loop with everything I'm doing at lawnerdApp.com, because that's where I'm going to keep you in the loop on all the cases that we're covering. And say it with me. May your Wi-Fi be strong. May your family be well. May your toilet paper be plentiful. And may the odds be ever in your favor. Emily, did we do that out of order? Yeah, like every show. Is there even an order? No, I'm not out of order. You're out of order. We can do what we want. Thank you for being with me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye. You can stay up to date with everything I'm covering on our free iOS and Android app at lawnerdapp.com, or search your app store for Law Nerd. And you can also follow me on social media at the Emily D. Baker. Remember, I stream on YouTube on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I recap all of that for you in quick bits on Monday. And of course, the Emily Show drops on Wednesdays. Thanks for being a Law Nerd.